Good morning, everyone. My name is Courtney Battle, and I am the acting executive director of HAND. And I'm so pleased to be with each of you this morning at today's activation entitled Expanding Housing Opportunities, How Municipalities Are Meeting the Need. You'll notice that I use the word activation and not training or webinar, and that was intentional. HAND is an association for professionals like yourself who are engaged in the community development and real estate space. And throughout the year, we do host a number of training and capacity building events, but we also work hard to activate our members and partners. We recognize that equally as important to the education is the advocacy and policy component that drives housing production and preservation across our region. And so 2 years ago, we launched what we call the Housing Indicator Tool, or HIT for short, a digital platform designed to track how our region is making progress on our deep housing challenges. And each year we release an updated version of the tool so you can access the latest data for your advocacy, case making, and educational needs. If you haven't already, I encourage you to visit the tool at hit.handhousing.org. In addition to the tool, we host what we call activations that really dig deeper on the data, discuss the tools that our members and partners are leveraging to create housing opportunities and more. But none of this work could be possible without partnership. And partnership is really at the core of everything we do here at HAND and allows us to really appropriately serve the needs of our membership and ultimately make greater impact on our communities. And so with that, I'd really like to take the opportunity to thank all of our wonderful partners who came together to organize today's session. You're going to hear from two wonderful panels on a variety of different topics this morning. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to our first moderator, Melissa Bondi with Enterprise Community Partners, who will frame our first discussion and get us going. So thank you very much, and I hope that you enjoy today's session. Thank you.
Good morning. Courtney, thank you so much for the introduction and for being invited to participate in this panel. It's my pleasure to welcome our first panel. This morning, this panel is going to explore the relationship between housing policy and land use. Jurisdictions across the metropolitan area are engaging in land use conversations in a variety of forms. From missing middle housing programs to the challenges of implementing their comprehensive plans, we know that land use and zoning are one integral part of housing policy decisions that are made in our region every day. So our conversation will explore how do land use and zoning policies impact local level housing policy, as well as what is the collaboration and the possibility across housing, planning, and zoning to further our housing affordability goals. We're so pleased to be joined by the first panel of experts, and friends, I would ask you to please come off camera. Come off black screen and join us on the camera. Our first panel of experts represents multiple localities across the region. We'll get started by introducing each one of you and hearing a little bit about the housing elements that you've highlighted for us today to kick us off. So Helen, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll go to Scott, and then we'll work our way through the panel. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Melissa, and thank you to you and to Han for inviting the City of Alexandria to participate in today's discussion, and I look forward to learning from all. I've got a couple pages here so I can take notes when I'm not, hopefully when I'm not on the camera. So I will say the City of Alexandria was extraordinarily pleased to participate in the COG Regional Housing Initiative. Like you and many others, we were part of the large constellation, really an army of housers that was looking at this. And while I will say, I think that regionally, we talked about it even before the Amazon HQ2 search, that really brought to the forefront the connection between housing supply and economic competitiveness, growth, development. And as we all discovered, we need a much greater supply of housing at a variety of levels to support our continued growth. So City Council took, after the Regional Housing Initiative was unanimously approved by the COG Board, the City of Alexandria, our City Council, endorsed the Regional Housing Initiative, including Alexandria's allocation of an additional 2,250 housing units at affordable to workforce, deeply affordable to workforce levels in March 2020. And since then, our City Council has adopted as one of its priorities, one of its 6 priorities, production of housing at a variety of price points. So it's very clear that we are focused on supporting the regional housing initiative, but also meeting our local target. In addition to our housing master plan target from 2013 of an additional 2,000 affordable units. So in all, a net new number of 4,250. And I'm proud to say we're on track. We are in the process of meeting our housing master plan goal by 2025, which is the horizon year. And we have certainly lined up a very robust pipeline of projects to meet our regional housing initiative target by 2030. But I will say that is, I'll get to this later, that is depending on funding. But this brings to helps emphasize the point that it's very important that we get all of our regulatory and land use tools to do as much for us as possible in terms of, both increasing the supply of housing, but especially in increasing committed, what our city calls committed affordable units. I know different jurisdictions have different acronyms. So as part of the endorsement of the Regional Housing Initiative, the city launched a process that is called Zoning for Housing, Housing for All. Housing for All was one of the principles we identified in our housing master plan. But here, we really are looking at something that is truly equity centered. And that means making sure that every planning process, every conversation we are endeavoring to undertake through culturally competent outreach, engagement, all different ways for all residents of the city to participate. So our zoning for housing and housing for all process, which we accelerated this past year and now hope to bring back to council and have passed in the next 6 months, is really looking at a variety of tools that will address both vestiges of past discriminatory housing practices and enhance access to housing as well as supply. So we're really trying to look at the big picture, but also dispersing committed affordable units to an even greater extent geographically. And that's another reason why regulatory tool zoning and land use are so important, is that as applied, they can bring housing to all neighborhoods. I will say a couple of the tools that we have included are the residential multifamily zone, which exchanges substantial density in exchange for deeply affordable units at the 40% AMI level, co-living, and preserving, sort of unique typologies through co-living. We have recently approved, for example, a project to preserve a rooming house that's providing very deeply affordable housing to 10 people. So the city has other policies to help us with this, and later on, I'm sure we'll get to it. Our planning processes and our investments are also helping us to achieve these goals. But I did want to, as I wrap up, to say that I think one of the things that has been most helpful to the city is tracking our progress and being accountable to our goals. So we do every quarter update our progress in meeting these goals. And it's something that not only our housing committee, we call them the shepherds of the process, but we also share with the community, with our elected leaders, so that everyone feels that they're part of this process and part of our achievements and in terms of meeting challenges. Thank you.
Helen, thank you so much. I'm going to pivot to Scott Bruton from Montgomery County to introduce himself in his slide. And just as a reminder, we appreciate how much knowledge and expertise everyone has. We're going to try to keep intros shorter so we can get to questions and hear more of the great details that you have to share. Thank you so much. Scott?
Thanks, Melissa. And thanks to Hand for inviting Montgomery County to be part of this panel. My name is Scott Bruton. I'm the director of the Department of Housing and Community Affairs in Montgomery County. In Montgomery County, the primary tool to increase housing through zoning is the moderately priced dwelling unit program, or MPDUs. Depending on where in the county, all new developments of 20 or more units must produce between 12.5% and 15% of their units as MPDUs, affordable to households making 70% or less of the area median income. And those can be for sale or rental as determined by the developer. New units that trigger this requirement mean either completely new construction or a renovation of a previous office or commercial use into residential. DHCA has representatives on Park and Planning's Development Review Committee who review development applications for compliance with the zoning ordinance and code for MPDU requirements. The zoning code provides incentives to developers to potentially increase the number of MPDUs created. In 2018, the bonus density provisions of the county's code were established to incentivize more MPDUs in mixed-use zones like downtown areas. It created a three-tier system that generates more MPDUs over the historic 12.5% in the county. Additionally, the zoning code allows additional height over and above the base zone's height requirements if more than 12.5% MPDUs are provided. The extra height allowed is based solely on the number of MPDUs provided. So more MPDUs equals more height. Recent area plans have added recommendations for additional MPDUs where applicable. In Bethesda, for example, the master plan adopted back in 2017 recommended a 15% MPDU requirement. And since then, there have been over 1,600 units created in that area of the county with approximately 230 MPDUs. And there are over 5,000 units planned in the pipeline for Bethesda with nearly 900 MPDUs in the pipeline. In the Bears Mill corridor, the 2019 master plan recommended emphasis on preservation of affordability to achieve no net loss of affordable housing during redevelopment. Each phase of the redevelopment must provide a number of affordable units, which would likely be MPDUs plus a combination of affordable rental units. We also have the Speed to Market initiative. It is something that the Park and Planning offers to assist developments with significant affordability to proceed through their entitlement processes more quickly. And we also have multiple planning and land use approvals, such as sketch, preliminary, and site plan, that can be consolidated into a single approval process. Additionally, a recently adopted zoning text amendment allows for expedited review when a project has a high level of affordable housing and some commercial use. And then finally, in 2019, a zoning text amendment revised the limited use provisions for attached and detached accessory dwelling units, and now allows detached accessory dwelling units in some of the most common residential zones in the county. It also changed the parking standards for those uses within 1 mile of Metro Rail, Purple Line, and MARC stations, so around transit corridors. So I'll cut off there and look forward to talking more during the questions.
Scott, thank you so much. Now we're going to turn to John. John, would you like to go next? And then Anna, you'll be up after John.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Just want to take a couple of minutes to talk about some of the great things that are happening in Loudoun County. If you can go to my fourth slide on this particular PowerPoint, I just want to talk about the action that Loudoun County has taken to date. We have an unmet housing needs strategic plan that we're in the midst of implementing through the year 2040, where we want to achieve 16,000 affordable housing units, or actually, as we call it, attainable housing units in Loudoun County. And by attainable housing units, we simply mean 0 to 100% of the area median income. And so we are on this journey, and part of the activities that we will be completing include 133 key action items. I'm not going to go through all of those, but I do want to highlight that zoning ordinance rewrite is one of the major lifts of this endeavor to facilitate and remove barriers for housing development and housing affordability. We our zoning ordinance rewrite is in process. Our planning board has moved it to the Board of Supervisors, and this fall we'll be considering that. Staff will be presenting in work sessions and with the ultimate goal of passing an updated zoning ordinance rewrite by the end of this calendar year. A couple of things that I also want to highlight is that we now have a dedicated local tax source of funding. It's a 1/2 cent of real property tax that has been financed or appropriated by the board to contribute to our endeavor. And then also program, very long title, the third bullet from the bottom, that just went into effect July 1st. If a project is 100% affordable, you can get $100,000 fee waiver reduction. So we're trying to make inroads and incentivizing developers to commit to providing some affordable units throughout the county. And I will leave it at that and be back with you later as we engage in conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, John. Anna, welcome and good morning.
Good morning. My name is Anna Shapiro. I'm a Deputy Director for Development at the Department of Housing in Fairfax County. So this slide just gives us a little bit of an overview of sort of what we do. We are in an interesting position because we are both an agency of the county as well as the housing authority for for Fairfax County and nearby jurisdictions. So we actually do a lot besides development. We also support homeless populations or persons experiencing homelessness, and we also manage the voucher program and also own and manage rental housing throughout the county. In terms of development and sort of our connection to zoning, we are very focused on achieving the county's goal of creating 10,000 new affordable units by the year 2034. We call affordable in our context as 60% AMI or below, just to give everyone sort of a sense. So we're trying to go from 60 to, all the way down to 0, just to make sure that we have opportunities for all. And we also are really working towards achieving a no net loss goal of affordable units. So we're looking at all of our committed and as well as our market affordable housing throughout the county and trying to find opportunities to preserve where possible, and also, continue to build as well and try to increase the supply. We use our kind of an innovative mix of state, federal, and local resources, since we have access to those as both the county agency and the housing authority. We also do a lot of ground lease transactions where we competitively select private partners in order to do redevelopment. For example, you can see kind of on the right a couple of our projects: residences at North Hill, residents of the Government Center, and Dominion Square West. These are a few of the different types of projects that we've done where we do own the ground, own the fee, and then are leasing the ground to the developers. We also have the affordable dwelling unit program, which is in our zoning ordinance, and the workforce dwelling unit, which is in our comprehensive plan. They're both sort of our main market, of creating affordable units through market rate development. They're done in different ways. One is a requirement. The affordable dwelling units trigger at 50 units or more. And then the workforce dwelling units are basically proffers that come out of zoning actions. They're really in exchange for density, but sort of different than the MPDU program. It's sort of project by project, and they are a little bit different. The affordable dwelling unit program serves households 70% and below, and then the workforce dwelling unit program currently, and I'll talk more about the sort of the changes coming, but currently serves households from 80% to 120% of AMI. And both rental and for sale homes are created through those programs. We also have gap financing opportunities and really try to encourage the acquisition and renovation of market rate affordable housing. We have a lot of garden style apartments throughout the county that we try to reduce displacement of residents and try to make sure that we can have a mix of ways of preserving and creating affordable housing. We've also recently amended our comprehensive plan to incentivize the preservation of affordable units, and that's basically when you have a redevelopment plan for kind of older housing, that we wanted to see a 1-for-1 replacement of those units, and that's our goal in the county. And then also finding ways to reform policies and finding additional kind of strategies through the entitlement process and other kind of connections we have to other county agencies to reduce the barriers to creating affordable housing, as well as just making sure we have those opportunities for home ownership. And wanted to just plug our One Fairfax policy. It's it weaves through all of our county programs, both the county agencies and schools, and it's our racial and social equity policy. We really see it as a touchstone to make sure that we're providing equitable opportunities for success for our residents and making sure that we can provide opportunities throughout the county. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Anna, thank you so much. Now, Mark, good morning. Look forward to hearing what you have to share with us from Prince William.
Okay, good morning. And I'm Mark McCaskill. I'm a principal planner in the Long Range Planning Division of Prince William County's Planning Office. And thank you for having me on the panel. I'm actually fairly recent arrival to the area. I started with the county in January. As you can see with my slide, I want people to note down, and I'll get to this, want them to note down a public meeting on October 2nd at Beacon Hall at George Mason's Prince William campus out there at Innovation, and also a planning commission public hearing here at the Counter Complex on November 8th. Just keep those two dates in mind. And so as an overview framework, last year, December 13th of 2022, the Board of County Supervisors approved a new comprehensive plan for Prince William County, and so approved several chapters, but the most important of which is a new land use chapter and a new housing chapter. So what this did is that the long range land use in the comprehensive plan now, all of the county has new long range land use classifications, and they're based on the planning concept of transects. So say a transect 3 would have a target residential density of 4 to 12 dwelling units per acres, transect 4, 8 to 24, so on and so forth, through from transect 1 through 6. What this does, practically speaking, is with a new comprehensive plan, it's possible in the immediate term for rezonings to occur with the comprehensive plan as guidance, so that developers and others can put in a proposal to try to rezone their property to a zoning district that's compatible with the higher target residential density in the comprehensive plan. So that's in the immediate term, and we've already seen a lot of that happening. Concurrent with that, now that we have a new comprehensive plan, zoning updates follow. So for an affordable dwelling unit ordinance, where I'm taking this into 2 phases. The first phase is specifically the affordable dwelling unit ordinance, developing that will be authorized by state enabling legislation. We're a little different than our neighbors. We are not able to take part in the state enabling legislation that's labeled section 15.2-2304. We were not listed as one of the localities that can tap into that, that state enabling legislation. So we have to choose between 15.2-2305 or 15.2-2305.1. So we have consultants right now, and we're working through that to get an affordable dwelling unit ordinance under one of those 2 statutes, and that's where the October 2nd and November 8th meeting, that's part of that process of phase 1. Once phase 1 is complete, we will be bringing an initiation package to the Board of County Supervisors, and I can't promise, but we're hoping that the board will initiate a phase 2, and the phase 2 will be a bunch of complementary initiatives and ideas, us to look into possibly using the state enabling legislation for incentive zoning to complement what we already have in an affordable dwelling unit ordinance, to look at different housing types to put in our planned mixed use residential zoning district that aren't there now, housing types that would represent missing middle housing types, to look at other possible barriers that may be elsewhere in the code that we're not aware of, that unintentionally are serving as a barrier to housing being redeveloped from a zoning or a land use perspective, and so on and so forth. So we're approaching this in 2 phases, and we're trying to get the affordable dwelling unit ordinance under the state enabling legislation done first, because 1 is already initiated, and 2, you may have heard of this term before. Virginia is considered to be a Dillon rule state, and what that means is we're pretty much tied to what the state legislature, the General Assembly, says we can do. So we're trying to do as much as we can under the state enabling legislation, and then move forward to look at other options in phase 2. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mark, and thank you to all the panelists. I think we're done with slides, so if panelists would please come on camera so we can start our joint conversations. I have a couple of questions for all of you. Anyone who wishes to answer any of the questions should feel free. We've got about 20 minutes of total time before we want to take some Q&A, so thanks so much. You all talked about some really impressive either existing work or kind of ongoing work right now. And when we think about zoning, of course, it can apply to a lot of issues beyond land use and housing, but fundamentally, we know it can be a really important tool for housing supply, location, affordability. So are there best practices that any of you have found have been particularly valuable that are in your housing portfolio that relate to zoning?
I could start that just on in terms of the ADU and WDU programs. We've had a lot of success with both programs. The ADU program has been around since 1990. I had it up a second ago, but the production for those programs, we've had just over 3,000 ADUs created. And that also includes a lot of homeownership opportunities, which we've managed the kind of the original sale and then also some of the resales of those as well. So those kind of keep continuing to create a robust portfolio of affordable homeownership opportunities. And then the WDU program is much more recent. It was created in the comp plan in 2007, but has already produced almost 2,000 units. So we've got a lot of production out of those programs. And something that I think we've been doing that we've worked with a consultant recently in updating our WDU homeownership program, and they said we're kind of unique in this in that we keep updating our program. So not only did we kind of establish it, we then kind of continually go back to it and see what's working, what's not working, and we've been pretty successful in actually updating it a few times. I think 2010, and then in 2021 we updated the rental program. We used to have rental AMIs go to 120, realizing that that's really not serving kind of the lower incomes we wanted to serve. So we brought down the AMIs for that program. And we're doing a similar effort right now for the affordable homeownership programs. We were finding that the 120% AMIs also were sitting on the market. We're very close to market in some areas. And so we've really been working. We set up a task force and it's sort of starting to wrap up. So we'll have recommendations for our board of supervisors soon. But that's really been to do the same thing where we're kind of looking at that 120% and 100% and saying, are we really serving, enough households? Are we able to kind of produce the housing that's necessary? And that, and we've looked a lot of the housing data, both what's available on the market and what households are kind of demanding that are on our wait lists for homeownership opportunities. And we're really finding that we will, likely make some changes to that 120% AMI level, similarly to the rental program. So more to come on that, but that's really kind of a big effort that we're doing now. So that's been, it's been ongoing for us.
Fantastic, thank you. Any others want to talk about the best practices, things that are working well? Otherwise, I'm happy to move to our next question. Okay. A couple of you mentioned zoning initiatives that are new or are still underway that are designed to kind of help in housing. And I'm wondering if anybody would like to talk a little bit more, maybe you didn't get enough of a chance during the opening in order to talk through kind of what are some of the hopes or what are some of the feedback you've heard or anything else on some of the new or ongoing processes that relate to housing.
So
Okay.
Melissa?
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Helen. I'll go next.
Great.
So I think, Anna raised an important point that, we really need to consider when we look at any policy, how do we create more options for those who have the greatest housing challenges? And typically in our community, those are, related to very low AMIs. And I think the other thing that comes from, that we are really more intentionally looking at in both the plans we do and then how all of our tools are applied is how can we make sure that no action that we're taking, potentially results in displacement, and how can we protect the people who are living there. So for a very long time, the city has had a policy that requires that all public housing, when it redevelops, is replaced on a one-for-one basis. But we are also, looking at how do we expand that. And I know Fairfax is doing something very similar now. And our residential multifamily zone actually requires that when it is applied. If there's existing housing, has to come back, and it has to come back at a very, very deep level. I mentioned earlier how important it is that those who are going to be impacted by decisions are at the table. So we have really tried to tremendously expand, our outreach and engagement, and we've been very lucky to have support from Virginia Housing to do this through their community impact grant. But I think we see that as something that's very, very high value. And, I think the pandemic made us all more creative about how we offer lots of opportunities for people to weigh in and provide comments. So we're doing things in person and virtually and maintaining web pages. So I think, when you're talking about how do you bring the community along, I think it's partly an education thing. It's partly, making sure your elected leaders also, understand the need and the tools you're proposing. But it's also making sure that you're bringing your partners and really all of your residents impacted along. Thank you. Scott, back to you.
Thank you. So we have several affordable housing related zoning changes that we're contemplating, but one I want to bring attention to, because it's not talked about very often, is we've created a working group to deal with the issue or to address affordability, senior affordability types through our moderately priced dwelling unit or inclusionary zoning, for other folks program. In the county, the MPDU program impacts senior restricted housing, and it also impacts independent living. And independent living is senior restricted with common dining and services, but it doesn't deal with assisted living, memory care, or skilled nursing. And so that is kind of a hole there. And we all know with the baby boomers moving through retirement that we have a huge senior bubble happening. And we all probably have heard the stats that the most likely folks to become homeless are seniors over the age of 55. And so what we're trying to look at is how to deal with we have a problem in that the MPDU program doesn't work with independent living because of the, many times several $1,000s per month fees, and how to get that working. And then obviously that goes also for assisted living, memory care, and skilled nursing. And so what we're trying to do is to develop a new strategy, have the MPDU program probably just apply to senior restricted, so just restricted to live there if you're over 60 or whatever in the jurisdiction, but then try to come up with a new program, a new way to deal with the types of senior living that have common dining and a variety of existing social and health services. And any of you all from other jurisdictions are welcome to join us in our work group if you have good ideas or good solutions to this, because it is going to be a very tough nut to crack, but one that jurisdictions all across the country are going to need to look at increasingly.
Yeah, I frankly, Scott, I'd love to see HAND be a convener in some of that, because I think we're all probably looking to address this in a meaningful way. It's certainly a topic. We're going to do an update to our housing master plan, but it is probably the most important chapter to get right as we plan for our future and think about how can we sort of call it senior housing plus care options and expanding those.
Until the federal government comes and saves us with Medicare and Medicaid to deal with this, we've got to come up with some solutions on our own.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much for that. Other comments or thoughts about new emerging best practices or what we were just talking about, Anna?
Oh, sorry. So just to build on Helen's comments of we have established a policy that recently got passed in the comprehensive plan to create sort of create a goal of one-for-one replacement of affordable units, market affordable units through redevelopments. We are currently working on the guidelines, so those will be finalized in the coming months. And so that program is, I think that where we have some developers kind of speaking to us and figuring out how to make it work. Basically, what would happen is in a redevelopment, typically you would need a comprehensive plan amendment, and that would follow. Then you need the entitlement kind of zoning action to follow. So this would allow them to skip the comprehensive plan amendment and really come in under this policy. And then we would evaluate the project to see if they can achieve the one-to-one replacement and get as close to that goal as possible in the redevelopment. We'd also really want to see a robust relocation plan because the displacement of residents is a major concern. We want to make sure that any redevelopment really holistically addresses that and provides opportunities for as many folks to come back as possible.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. Any other thoughts before I move on to our next question? This is great conversation.
I just wanted to highlight some of the things that we're working on in Loudoun County. We're undergoing a massive overhaul of our zoning ordinance that was done about 30 years ago. And even though that is being led by our Department of Planning and Zoning, there is a chapter 9 that's dedicated for attainable housing, which is 0 to 100% AMI. And some of the things we've had a lot of interdepartmental collaboration and some stakeholder engagement throughout the process so far to try to figure out how can we, either remove barriers where possible, or at least try to meet the private developers in the middle. They may not want any legislation, whereas we feel as public administrators there has to be some regulatory guidance. So we've tried to, really be practical and feasible in our approach to come up with some ways that we think can satisfy everybody, so that at the end of the day, we can, increase housing affordability, remove barriers, and decentralize poverty throughout the county on a more consistent basis. Some of the things that we're looking at are increasing with our inclusionary zoning affordable dwelling unit program, increasing the unit requirement, going up to 10% for attached multifamily housing development and up to 15% for multifamily stacked. Again, I have to emphasize this is what we're proposing. Nothing has been adopted by the board. We're going to go into those discussions this fall. But these are some of the recommendations that have bubbled up through our planning commission consideration. We also are aiming to remove barriers that correlate with our unmet housing needs strategic plan. There are about 3 different key action items in that plan that target removing barriers. So, streamlining requirements, consolidating some of the affordable dwelling units and unmet housing need units and AHUs. We got these ADUs, UNUs, and AHUs. So try to give you that nomenclature here. With the affordable housing units, or AHUs, we have, and ADUs, we have in the current plan that was passed in 1993, our ADUs have to meet certain design requirements to be comparable to equivalent market rates. And what we're planning to recommend is to add more flexibility into terms how comparable standards can be met 30 years later through innovative design. Interspersion is another area that we're trying to address, making minor revisions to the draft. We want to focus on deconcentrating poverty. So in a lot of design developments that we see, a lot of developers like to, gravitate toward putting all of the affordable units one part of the development. And we'd like to see them interspersed throughout a development to try to create a more mixed income, sustainable community. So those are some of the things that we are working on, that we're excited about, and we'll look forward to having continued discussions this fall to see if we can make those enhancements to our zoning ordinance rewrite.
That's great, John. Thank you so much. I see we have some questions starting to stack up. So let me ask you one other question. I think overlaps a little bit with one of the questions in chat, and then we'll open it up and I'll read out some of the Q&A. Anytime a community undertakes review on almost anything involving land use, and certainly almost anything involving zoning, it can bring a lot of community energy. right? People want to share their hopes, they want to share their fears, they really want to, kind of better understand. Helen, you had started to talk a little bit about community engagement and kind of the proactive work that you're doing. I know that's probably true in every jurisdiction. I wondered if folks would like to talk a little bit more about how you're working within your communities to address those hopes and fears that always come to the surface whenever we're looking at zoning elements for housing. Helen, you had started by talking about the Virginia Housing Community Impact Grant. Everybody may not know quite what that is. Would you like to talk just a little bit more about kind of the context for that? Maybe to kick us off.
Oh, I'd be very glad to. So we've used
Thank
this
you.
tool 3 times in processes that include significant, what I would call housing issues or challenges. So one to preserve 2 communities that have contracts that will redevelop and preserve those units, but preserve them by redeveloping them, but at the same AMI level. So in that case, it included, hosting a charrette for a week, and the funds from Virginia Housing come as a grant. They ensured we could provide, all of the support needed to get, as I said, the residents who were impacted, but community members, developers in a room, and, for a week, and sort of hammer out all of the things that needed to happen, as well as for us to do some work to understand that it takes 4 or 5 market rate units, so substantial density, to create a unit that's affordable at 40% AMI. And since we created that zone, I will say we've have 5 projects that will yield almost 1,000 units in the city, which is, tremendous. The other thing I would say is that, again, recording meetings, having hybrid meetings, having just sort of a constant dialogue. But in Alexandria West, which is probably the city's most diverse area, it's the Beauregard corridor, and 20% of the city's residents live there. We're using the funds now to both work with community partners who are getting stipends to, bring those that, have the trust of the community and residents along, but also have meetings interpreted and materials translated into, the 6 languages that are common in that area. As well as, I would say, we're looking at how do we learned this a little bit during the pandemic, how do we learn to make information more graphic so it can be understood by folks in any language using WhatsApp. So again, just always to bring the community along, but make sure that they have places to go for their comments. The other thing which we are doing, because this is probably a higher friction plan. I loved energy. That's a much more positive word. But the staff involved are doing some work with a group that is, helping us through not just how do we do it better, but what I will call maybe the emotional and self-care part of the work, when sometimes you are, trying to figure out how this work about which you're so passionate is not received in the way you're meaning it to be. So, and I think learning to say sometimes maybe we need to pause this, because what people are really talking about is they're unhappy about building conditions. And so how do we take care of that and then return to our planning process so the focus can be on the things we need to do. So I would say we're learning flexibility, but we've had great supports. And I think it's a cost of, community processes that you need to plan for, because it's both a staffing capacity and making sure too you have staffs that look like all the folks you're hoping to engage. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for talking through that with us, Helen. That was great. I'm going to turn to the Q&A. I want to thank our panelists who have been already active and helping to answer some of the questions. Thank you also to the audience for your excellent questions. I'm going to start with those that really relate to zoning, housing and zoning first, while we have time, and then we'll cover as many as we can, but folks should feel free to provide answers in writing if they have the opportunity to do so in interest. We had a question about mixed income developments and what are the design specifications for the committed affordable units within an inclusionary housing program. They all have different acronyms in different jurisdictions, in that are competing with the market rate units, or at least being compared to them. So there's a question about what are the finishes, how do luxury condo buildings that have MPUs or inclusionary zoning, how do those work together, or what are some of the design standards that help achieve equity, but then also are using resources well. Would anybody like to speak to that question? Please, Anna, why don't we start with you?
Sure. We do have a few different policies in both programs. They do have to be dispersed throughout the projects, and we do review the site plans and condo, and site plans and floor plans to make sure that there is kind of a distribution, that they're not all at the back of the building or near the trash or anything like that. There is there's minimum size requirements, and then there's also some kind of comparable sizing, but they can be the smaller of the developments. In the ADU program in particular, it's because it's a cost neutral program, the sort of the cost of the unit is actually determines the price. So there's sort of a double-edged sword there. We actually end up getting the units for a little bit cheaper than what you might have for like let's say the light type pricing, and the way you might determine that pricing. The units are really based on the construction costs, so they actually are quite affordable for the households that they're served. However, they may have the lower finishes, so that is allowable. And we are looking at, and sort of in our continuous effort to update our programs, we are looking at the WDU program right now, and actually identifying kind of ways that we can, and sort of discussing that with private developers who are part of the task force as well, to see like what the impact would be if we, kind of toggled some of those as well, to make sure that, can we get the same family size, can we get family sized units in both, making sure that we're requiring that, and then making sure that we have them kind of more comparable and equitable results for those units. So we continue to look at that. Thanks for the question.
Thank you for that response. That's great. Thank you. Anyone else on that one before I speak to another one? We have a question. What could we do to help make zoning changes less susceptible to lawsuits? Are there ways to help mitigate the risk of lawsuits as a way to block, in this case, affordable housing projects or development?
I think we'd all be pretty rich if we figured it out. That's a challenge. It's a challenge. And I think this kind of goes back to some of the engagement that we can do to really bring folks along in the process, and kind of create buy-in early, and create kind of that sort of really personal engagement, both with the zoning process, with housing, with our county leadership, and making sure they are sort of engaging their own constituents, which they do a lot, and are very active in that space. And also really messaging kind of the people who are served by the programs, because I think that is often lost in kind of the language that we use, that there's really such a diverse variety of folks that we are able to serve through all of our programs, and kind of going all the way from kind of our public housing through our tax credit projects, all the way to our, kind of more the WDU program, which serves a moderate income. But we really are finding that there's that we want to incentivize people working and staying in the county, that really is building a thriving economic environment to have people that at all incomes have those opportunities. So I think just really kind of continuing to message that we're really trying to build a diverse community that supports everyone at all levels. I think that is really important to maybe hopefully, stemming some of that, right?
That's always the goal. Another challenge is the fact that our district court judges across the region, who see so many different kinds of cases, are not land use experts. They're not folks who necessarily, they or their staff, have the same grounding in, some of the really detail-oriented work that goes into land use and zoning. So they're also trying to learn in real time, and try to juggle when they see stuff. So it's certainly a challenge for everybody. But thank you for that answer. I don't mean to cut off anyone else if they would like to answer before I look at the chat for other Q&A, but thank you again for those who have been answering directly in Q&A. There's a question specifically about Loudoun, but it is a land use related question. And the question speaks about the data centers in Loudoun and the relationship between the market pressure for a commercial use versus a residential use. So rather, you can take it wherever you'd like to. I don't mean to put you on the spot, John, but I'm curious if for a minute or two, you'd like to talk a little bit about how the work that's being undertaken in Loudoun now for the zoning rewrite, et cetera, is helping to balance those uses for land, including but not limited to residential.
Yes, I saw this question and I've been contemplating the response. Very, very insightful question. We are, landlocked on the eastern side of the county, mainly because of the data centers, and they are our competitors when we're looking for land to develop on. But basically, the short-term response or the strategy is for us to really start to look at publicly owned land that the county has in its portfolio and inventory, and begin to activate that land where possible. So you're going to start to see some, whatever you call it. I call it solicitation for offers, SFOs, but most people call it RFPs. To see what developers can do with the land that the county has to activate to increase rooftops at the end of the day. That's going to be our short-term strategy, because there's little that we can do to compete with the data centers. And so you're going to see that happening hopefully later this fall, some of those opportunities to be announced.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. So that we can kind of pivot and help move to our panel 2, great conversation with our next set of experts. I want to take a moment and say thank you so much to everyone, obviously to all of you fantastic panelists, for your expertise, for everything you shared with us proactively, and also your response to the great questions that we've received. Thanks also to our audience for questions. Please continue to engage in the Q&A so that, if there's more information that we can provide, even as we transition into our second great panel, we can do that for you. But thanks on behalf of everyone here on this panel for your good questions. And why don't I turn things over to Hand and to Jill for our second panel. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa.
Yes, and we'll turn it right over to you, Jill.
Okay, thank you so much, Courtney. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jill Norcross, and I'm the Executive Director of the Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance, and thrilled to be the moderator for our second panel today. So I'm going to go ahead and welcome our second panelist to come back on camera, and as I just give a quick update about what we're going to be speaking to. So our next panel looks at how jurisdictions are building strong foundations for furthering housing affordability. This panel is unique in that several of our panelists represent the Baltimore region, which is a new addition to the HIT this year. Additionally, some jurisdictions are in the early stages of developing the housing policies and priorities that will shape their jurisdictions for the next several decades. We recognize that building a framework is an evolution, and there are always external factors, local politics and markets and needs, resources from state and federal agencies that really can impact a jurisdiction's ability to make progress. This conversation offers an opportunity to learn more about these municipalities and explore ways they are looking to address housing affordability. We're thrilled to have Alice Kennedy from the city of Baltimore, Terry Hickey from Baltimore County, Peter Engel of Howard County, and Yvette Monty from the city of Manassas Park. They're going to further introduce themselves and then give you a brief overview of what is happening in their respective jurisdictions before we launch into our panel discussion. So Alice, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Excellent, great. And good to see everybody, and hope that, there we go. I was waiting for the slide to come up. Good to see everybody this afternoon or morning. Wanted to just touch on a little bit of what we do here in Baltimore. The commissioner for the Baltimore City Department of Housing and Community Development. And in terms of affordable housing, we have essentially kind of 4 different ways with a number of different strategies and so forth within these kind of 4 buckets of how we ensure that we're not only creating new affordable housing units, but also preserving new affordable housing units. One of the first things is our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which was created through charter legislation. And that really covers a number of different activities, one of which is new preservation and creation of new units with rental housing, multifamily rental. But a key piece in here also is the support out of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for affordable home ownership units through our community land trusts, which I think is a key component to the work that we're doing in Baltimore, especially when we talk about anti-displacement strategies associated with development, affordable housing, and equitable neighborhood development as well. Another key item in terms of creation of affordable housing is our vacant property reduction strategy. We have a lot of opportunity for scattered site affordable housing production, which is a lot of what the community land trusts are doing. But we also have a lot of developers that are out interested in creating opportunities through renovation of vacant properties for affordable rental properties, affordable homeownership properties, and some developers out there that are also interested in looking at a scattered site LIHTC project, which isn't necessarily some of the more popular LIHTC projects, but it's something that that I've actually highlighted is a need that we need in Baltimore and could definitely help us as we tackle that. You know, we have 13,952 vacant properties in Baltimore. We continue to drive that number down. But affordable housing creation is a way that we're looking to try to renovate those 13,952 properties. Also, just should throw out there that we're looking at an affordable housing non-contiguous TIF to help us with that as well. In terms of unit creation and preservation, we have a number of different ways that we do this through our lending and our project finance team, home dollars, and also preservation of units comes in not just on the multifamily side, but I'm a big proponent of explaining and having people understand that we have a lot of low-income families, low-income older adults, that their unit, if you consider their home that they own as a homeowner, is an affordable housing unit that needs to be preserved because, you know, they might mortgage paid off, they're just responsible for paying taxes, water bills, etc. And there really isn't anywhere else for them to go in the city to have that same kind of monthly housing costs. And then our code enforcement. This is a critical component of our affordable housing work, just ensuring that everybody's living in safe and healthy environments as it comes to affordable housing and what we're doing in Baltimore. So excited to be here and excited to talk with my colleagues and also share additional information on any of the number of ways that we're handling both production, creation, and preservation of units.
Wonderful. Thank you for that great overview, Alice. Okay, I'm going to welcome Terry Hickey now to give us a brief overview of what he's working on in Baltimore County.
All right, great. Well, thanks, Jill. It's great to see some of my colleagues. It's great to follow Alice and see Peter. I crammed a lot more words onto my slide, Alice. So we'll let folks kind of read it as I'm talking. I won't go through all of these, but I'm Terry Hickey. I am the first ever director of DHCD in Baltimore County. A little trivia, we'll get to that one later. We include housing finance, housing development, homeless services, housing stability, which is rental assistance, homeownership protection. We also oversee all of our HUD entitlement grants, and we encompass our PHA. So we're sort of cover everything and trying to put everything on a continuum that makes sense. I'm really excited to be here today. This isn't just an introduction sort of on the panel. I think it's really an introduction of Baltimore County. A lot of folks are saying Baltimore County isn't generally part of these conversations about affordable housing, and we need to be. We're the third largest county now by population. We're getting close to 900,000 residents and growing rapidly. More diverse by the day, but we're also one of the most rapidly aging counties in the state. So we have to really look at all ends of the housing spectrum. To be honest, we're a jurisdiction where affordable housing development in a strategic way really hasn't always been a priority, and it needs to be, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the way that we're going to support the enormous economic growth that we're experiencing. So my theme and all my answers today is going to be aggressive capacity building and finding a way to get into the affordable housing development production game post-pandemic at a time that it can be fairly difficult to do. But I think one of the exciting parts is we weren't wed to any particular model. We haven't done a lot of LIHTC projects in the county. We haven't really strategically always used CDBG and home money. So looking at new sources of revenue in the pipeline to fund housing deals is going to be a theme that I keep hitting over and over again. We are the first ever DHCD. This department was founded during the current county executive's term. We launched our first ever affordable housing work group in the past 2 years. We passed a package of foundational bills to support housing development, including the county's first ever housing fund, which we call the Housing Opportunity Fund. There's a lot of firsts. It's another theme. We get to copy the good stuff from everybody else. And we're really going to talk a little bit about helping really work on developing relationships with developers. How do we rethink our own internal process to make things smoother and easier? A ton of development organizations operate out of Baltimore County, or their principals live in the county. They have a vested interest in doing the work, but the conversations usually start with, hey, but I've never done a project in Baltimore County. How can we make that happen? And we are built around working to make that happen while also working with our federal partners. I think competitive federal grants and some of the new ideas coming out of the White House are going to be something else we'll talk about a bit. So I'll leave it there. Looking forward to questions. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us, Terry. Exciting to see what you have planned. I'm going to switch now to Peter Engel from Howard County. Peter, glad to see you.
Hi, good to see you again, and all the rest of you here. Happy to be here and to have this conversation, to really listen and learn. Just as a quick thought, it looks like the first panel is more DC focused, and this is more Baltimore region focused. And I think we're fairly different in attitudes and how we're all going about this. So it was really helpful for me to hear that panel. Our county executive, Calvin Ball, is often fond of saying that Howard County is usually ranked one of the best places to live overall, but we should make it also one of the best for all. And we really are trying to do that. The county exec commissioned the first housing master plan study that the county has ever done. And so for our framework, some of the things we're doing come out of that. Just quickly, the issues, I think many of us face these same general issues, but the big issue overall is that, what we pay people doesn't cover what it costs to build housing or preserve housing. So we inevitably end up in the subsidy game instead of in the wage issue, although really, interestingly enough, COVID and minimum wage statutes have started to have an impact on that and have helped us. There's a shortage of housing locally, regionally, in the state and nationally, and that clearly goes back into costs. Another very sort of macroeconomic problem. And you read about that all over the place. And finally, with a lot of the new housing produced in our region generally, because land costs are high, that housing cost tends to be high. So we're building housing at the high end of the market, and the need is more at the lower middle end of the market. And we do a rental housing study every few years, and you can see that in terms of incomes and what housing is available is clearly off. And that's not being remedied much currently. Some of the solutions we're going out are expanding. Obviously, like everybody, you look to expand affordable housing, and really a lot of that is done by expanding housing and then requiring affordability. So we have limits on the number of permits that can be issued in Howard County, which artificially constrict the supply, making the job of producing affordable housing that much harder. So we're looking at that. That needs to change. And we are going through our 10-year master plan right now. So there's some hope there. We also need to expand where the housing is built. And this then touches on my last point. So I'll come back to that. We need more multifamily zones. We need more townhouse zones, which is our equity issues. We need to expand our local right of first refusal. This is something that a few jurisdictions have, where we can help preserve housing by buying existing housing that's on the market. And we're looking to expand that to make that more viable. We have a housing trust fund that needs money. Again, more money is sort of a very common theme. And then back to that expanding where things can be built, we really need to focus a little more on location where things are built. as it stands now, with very limited multifamily zones, we tend to concentrate our new construction in existing areas where there's multifamily. That tends to concentrate poverty, that impacts the schools. So our high poverty rate schools are, fairly concentrated. And all of these issues then run together, and really for a focus on equity, they need to be addressed together. And finally, very quickly, if anybody's looking at my slide, there's a border around here. And you may ask, if this were live, somebody would ask, no doubt, what is that border supposed to mean? And in my view, to some extent, it feels like no matter what we do here, we're still playing around the edges a bit. The need is so high that our solutions, I think, are years to cause anything that's approaching an actual fix. So that's sort of my emotional level of it anyway. We're still at it, and we will be doing all of these things and making a real impact. But when you look at the big picture, at times it can be daunting.
Thank you, Peter. Really appreciate that overview and your analogy as well. Last but not least, we're going to move over to Virginia and welcome Yvette Monty with the City of Manassas Park. So thank you, Yvette, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Han, for the wonderful job you're doing with the affordable housing space. Thank you for having me. I don't have any of those elaborate plans that everybody has, especially the first panel. But I think it's important to engage in this conversation as a small city. Do you mind going to the next slide, Jill? Okay. For those that don't know where Manassas Park is, we're not Manassas City, we're Manassas Park City. We're very small. We are about 3 square miles, 17,000 people. We do have some programs, some housing programs that are administered by Prince William County because we're so small. We cannot even get CDBG funding directly to our city. We also have the Housing Choice Voucher Program that is administered by the City of Manassas. And believe it or not, we did not even have a community services department until 2021. So just like Terry said, he's the first ever director. I am the first ever housing coordinator for Manassas Park. Which is great. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity there to create opportunities for the residents. So I'm very happy to be in that position. So what we have been doing with this department is a lot of community outreach and engagement, which we did not have the capacity to do before. And we have been connecting with the community and learning about the needs that we have there. It's not just housing, it's any needs, could be health, could be education, parenting, anything that we see that is a need. It is not something that we are saying that is a need. We are listening to the residents to see what they need. So with that engagement, we have created events, wellness fairs, community days, cultural events to engage the community to come. And also those events serve to promote some of the programs that are already there that people don't know and don't take advantage of. So those programs could be rental utility assistance programs, can be homeownership programs, health, education, all of the ones that I already mentioned. And also as far as a strategy for housing, what we're working on right now is a housing needs assessment. We just advertised an RFP last week. That's where we're going to start with the hard data so that we can present recommendations to the governing body. After we get that assessment, we're going to work with the Urban Land Institute, ULI, with a panel of experts who will review the assessments and make recommendations and create reports. And from that, we can create actionable items. Of course, we have to present that to the governing body. That's where we are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yvette. Thank you very much, all of you, for that kind of very succinct but important overview. We're going to launch into some discussion questions that we, previewed with all of you. So feel free to just kind of come off mute if this question speaks to you, or I'll call on you if if nobody jumps in, but just to start us out, and I know you spoke to so many needs in your community, and I think when you are kind of an emerging leader in the affordable housing policy space in a local jurisdiction, there are a lot of needs that you all identify that must be addressed. But for each of you, if you could just talk to what you see your greatest need is in your jurisdiction, it would be really helpful. This could be by income band, the housing type, new production versus preservation. It would be really great to just hear from you, your number one priority in your community.
I can go first if you want. We do need, this is just my personal, because we don't have the hard data, but I think we all know this. We need housing for low to moderate income households, especially essential workers. For example, police officers, first-time responders are not able to live in our communities in Northern Virginia. They have to live far away and come to work because they cannot afford, with their salaries, they cannot afford the housing prices, rental or homeownership.
Great. Thank you, Yvette. Appreciate that. Anyone else want to go ahead and just give your number one priority?
Yeah. So this is going to sound like a convenient statement, but in Baltimore County as a growing suburb, we need housing for everyone across all income bands, seniors, all the way down to low income supportive housing, right? The biggest, now it's a strange thing, but it's a great thing in the sense that we can make housing an across the board conversation. So we don't have to focus on any one particular group, which in a suburban county is an important talking point. The challenge is we're running out of places to build. Even though we haven't invested in this type of housing that we need, we're running out of room. We're a heavily built up county. Like Peter said, a number of our areas are highly concentrated already. Our new master plan states that in a decade, we will be out of buildable land. So the look that we're doing is county-owned surplus property, redevelopment of commercial and retail space, and I think really exciting, the acquisition and preservation of old multifamily that needs freshening up, preservation, and restriction in a really hot real estate market. So these are all huge opportunities and challenges at the same time.
Yeah, and I'll just say, it's a really good question and one that comes up to us all the time. And it feels to me like my answer is always the same also, and always sort of tilting at windmills, which is that when we ask that to some degree, we're just pitting one group in need against another group in need. And that need, whether it's the, very, very low income or the homeless who clearly have the greatest need, but are a smaller number than a group that's struggling to make ends meet and raising kids and, may have, as a bigger group, but may have a few more choices. It's just the wrong, it's always the wrong question in that sense, that what we really need to be doing is saying, we have need in homeless, we have need in families, we have need in seniors, we have need in, state and local workers who can't afford to live here, or other, other workers. Those are all the needs. And I've always sort of struggled to try to not pick one against the other. At times you think we could make more progress with one. If we just attacked veterans homelessness, we could end that. And maybe that's true, but then who are you leaving out when all of your focus goes there? So I know that's a pipe dream to think we can attack it all. Maybe we do need to prioritize this way, but I've always found that difficult. So I'll leave it out as I have a bad answer for you.
Not a bad answer at all. And thank you for your honesty there. And I do think it kind of speaks a little bit to Terry's point of really, this is an opportunity for all of us to engage in conversations about the need for housing affordability across the spectrum. I feel like this crisis has brought us to a point where we can have that conversation with anybody, because we really are, all segments and sectors of our society are affected. So Alice, I don't know if you have an answer, a different answer than what you've heard so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's a similar kind of, if I were to take all three of my fellow panelists' answers and, put them together, I think we'd be looking at the same thing in Baltimore. I mean, we have a significant need just for the sheer number of units that are 30% below AMI, for some of our most vulnerable residents. But then at the same time, we get conversations and phone calls and requests for people that really need are struggling to even find something in that 80% and above, you know, like 80 to 120%. And trying to kind of balance that in terms of how to help, which falls a little bit to what Peter was saying, and how do you try to prioritize and make that work? I mean, right now, due to some significant funding opportunities that kind of came through with our ARPA dollars and our CD, our home CV money, you know, we have a focus on creating some PSH, some permanent supportive housing units, just due to the sheer amount of money that we have right now going out on the street for that. But that doesn't mean that we can't take our eyes off of the other pieces of the puzzle in terms of how to create units that fit both the great need, you know, where we have somewhere 15,000, 16,000 people on a waiting list with the housing authority, up to the people that are constantly kind of calling the office and saying, I don't know what I'm going to do right now. I can't find some place. I'm a mom with 4 kids and I work 3 jobs and I still can't find anything because I'm over income. So it's a difficult one to try to figure out exactly how to prioritize all those.
Jill, Peter inspired just a real quick comment I want to make, if you don't mind, because even the conversation, the way the question was framed about income bands can be pretty divisive. And so we ran an exercise these past couple months where we started to track county employees and where they would fit on those bands. And so the average Department of Corrections worker in Baltimore County would sit around 60% AMI. And then, you know, I could go through. So we talk about, like, what does a 60% AMI household look like? It isn't workforce housing just because we want to call it that and not call it affordable. It's really the people making the county run fit into these traditional bands that we think are suitable for affordable housing. So we really got to rethink the way we approach the conversation when we do this.
Great point. Thank you, Terry, so much. Okay, we're going to pivot a little bit to housing production, and I'm interested to hear from each of you if you're seeing interest from the development committee community to build more new affordable or mixed income housing in your jurisdiction. And if so, some of you have touched on this in your opening statements, but if you could talk a little bit more in detail about what policies are in place or what you're hoping to put in place to make that more attractive to developers right now.
I mean, I can jump on this. We have a number of projects that are, you know, multi-family mixed income development projects looking to kind of come on board. Some are also a significant number of LIHTC projects in a pipeline on our last Affordable Housing Trust Fund round that we just did for funding availability. I think we were upwards of 30 applicants, you know, 30 projects ready to kind of have us be in their capital stack for support. And we were only able to support 7 out of 30 projects. So, you know, there's lots of developers out looking to create opportunity for multifamily production that is both, you know, LIHTC and then also, we've had some great success with our Perkins Somerset Old Town project and the creation of multi-income, multifamily buildings that we get to see kind of coming up from the office window, which is a great way to visualize construction in a jurisdiction. But, you know, the demand is there. And like I said, too, we also have a significant amount of demand for people interested in spot scattered site redevelopment because we are unique in Baltimore City in that we have the opportunity for the redevelopment of the single family homes for rental and or affordable home ownership, but definitely demand on the multifamily side.
Yeah, that's right. Yvette, if you want to go.
Sure, yes. I believe that developers would be interested in finding an opportunity for new developments in our city. We are very small, so it's, I mean, Terry said that you're going to run out of land. I think we already did with 3 square miles. I'm sure we can find, you know, spots somewhere in the city. But as I said, we're in the research phase at this point. We just advertised the request for proposals from consulting firms for housing needs assessment. So this needs assessment with its recommendations will be presented to the city leadership, and I'm sure that lack of land will come up in the report, and with options of how to find places, to develop and create affordable opportunities. So that's what I have as far as that.
I'll say that I think there is a lot of desire out there to develop in Howard County. It's a good place, the rents are high, it's a good place to develop. You can do mixed income fairly easily because you can get some market rate that's can support itself at least often. And our problem is back to sort of land and community, I think. I'll start the community conversation here. And this is probably different in our jurisdictions, but we have, for instance, in Columbia itself, which is not actually a city, but just a giant homeowners association, the zoning is controlled largely by the county council. And so there was a plan to take one of the village centers, used to be called the Shopping Center Plus or something. In Columbia, we have village centers and redevelop that with multifamily and retail underneath and a lot of new retail, and that was basically shot down. And so we have, I think there is plenty of desire to develop, and the biggest impediment is the conversation with the community, which has, I'd say, a mix of concerns, some real concerns about school capacity, traffic concerns. There's, obviously some, I think, standard NIMBYism wrapped up in there. There's concerns about property values. And there are sort of concerns about neighborhood character. What does a multifamily feel like in a suburban community that's been traditionally single family detached or maybe townhouses? And so those conversations are played out at the political level. And then they play out through zoning, they play out through school redistricting, they play out through APFO, which many suburban counties have, adequate public facilities ordinance, which is a limit on, limits development. And in our case, again, just straight up permits. We only allow a certain number of housing permits per year. And so that becomes the issue more than development or developers. That's a big issue, along with currently financial capacity. So dollars from the state, given the housing cost inflation, how to make projects actually financially feasible. Are kind of the two big impediments that I think hit the actual, when you're looking at actually what's going on with people trying to develop, that's where we're running into problems.
So this is probably the question that really got me thinking the most, because in Baltimore County, we, to be honest, have had a history of our affordable developers have had projects knocked offline for a variety of reasons. They've lost money, they've lost time. Back when building was a lot easier to do, right? And so we've had to work on winning their trust back and let them know that we're seriously supportive of the work that they're doing and looking to make it easier and safer for them to do it. And that's a political question, like Peter said. It's also a process question. It's also a money question. What are we really going to offer? And then, development's been on a boom for a while in Baltimore County, but it hasn't been affordable. Not at least on the official level. And so we've had to engage with a whole plethora of market rate developers that have never dealt with public funding sources, that don't speak the language, that don't really know how the process works. And we don't have inclusionary housing in Baltimore County. So we've had to do it on a permissive sense where we're convincing developers to add affordability to their existing market rate projects. So creating DHCD was a good start. Having a department that's focused on this speaks to priorities. It was strangely helpful to have the county executive say in his inaugural speech in his second term, this is the priority of my second and final term in office, housing production. He called out NIMBYism. I'm not sure that's ever happened in an inaugural speech in Baltimore County. And so then the rubber hits the road. We had to create the housing fund. We've put $16 million in ARPA and over $4 million in general funds. We can continue to grow that fund. We have a non-lapsing request for applications that bundle together all of our different housing supports. It's open and rolling. People can apply whenever they want. We've done a survey of our vacant or our surplus property. We even had to pass legislation to define vacant properties to give us an opportunity to list them. We didn't have Alice, we didn't have a definition of vacant. So we had to create one so that we could advertise those. I'm laughing at that because I know Alice deals with this all the time. So that we could put those lists out potentially in the future to developers to go after those properties and try to buy them on the private market. We're looking at competitive grants at the federal level. Developers are nervous of electrification and other sustainability coming down the pike. But if the federal government's putting money out through grants, can we get private developers' attention on that front? So there's a mathematical formula most people don't know about. When you go to MACO, Maryland Association of Counties, every year, the amount of developers that come up to you and say, I want to do a project in your county per day translates into a formula. And based on the number of interest we got in the last few days at MACO, I think we're on the right track, but time will be told in the next year or so.
Great, thank you so much. So I want to pivot a little bit to talk about preservation and what role preservation plays in your housing strategy. And if you feel like your housing strategy is balanced between that new production that we talked about and preservation, or is it skewed one way? And Alice, I'm going to call on you first because I know you really addressed this in your opening comments, and it's a priority in City of Baltimore.
It is absolutely a priority for us. And I think on the multifamily side, we have a number of different projects that are aging and are needing to kind of go through renovations or recapitalization and trying to figure out how to best help those on the multifamily side. Sometimes, there's complex components to it, and we're being asked as one of the jurisdictions in to see what we can do in terms of loan forgiveness or interest forgiveness. So really needing to kind of put that as a priority in terms of there really would be no other way to preserve those units unless we are making the decisions and policy steps to say, yes, we will be able to forgive this component of some of the loans that we've had on those. So that is one of the policy ways in terms of showing up at the table and not trying us as a jurisdiction to be a bureaucratic barrier in getting through this process, but trying to work as best as we can and as fast as we can on that side, right? So that's on the multifamily side. And then I really can't emphasize enough for us, in terms of the fact that our low-income homeowners across the city, the majority of them, when you look at what their total overall housing costs are right now, in terms of the house is paid off, no mortgage, they have their taxes, hopefully insurance. That's another issue that we have, is sometimes they're not paying insurance anymore, but hopefully they have their taxes, their insurance, water, electric, etc. There really is no, and a lot of those families and households are actually multi-generational. So it's not just that you have two people or a partner or two adults in a property or two siblings. We have some one that I know, it's just two sisters in a property, but a lot of those are multi-generational. So some of these households have, maybe 6, 7 people, 5 in a house, and they're making it work because of the fact that the housing costs on a monthly basis is so low. We don't have the units across the city if that family were to need to move out of that property because it's unsafe or, because of the condition of the property has gotten to a point where they can't live there or they're not being able to maintain the property. We don't have anywhere else for them to go. So the way we look at it is that if we can assist that homeowner in ensuring that they have a roof, which is, what we call the Achilles heel of a Baltimore row home. But if they have roof, if they have heating, working electrical, working plumbing, etc. And if that means us making an investment through a grant or through a deferred loan, ranging in the $10,000 to $25,000 range, then at this stage, in terms of the cost of new construction and the cost of a new affordable unit, we're doing a pretty good job on trying to preserve those units coming in at maybe $25,000 of an investment in maintenance, which sometimes is ensuring that there's housing for 5 or 6 or 7 family members. So this is a huge part of our focus in terms of, it's not just about ensuring that we're helping families build generational wealth and ensure that their investment in their home is taken care of, but it's also ensuring that we have preserved that housing unit, which happens to be affordable and happens to be affordable for a number of different people.
Thanks, Alice. That's amazing to think about the breadth of when you talk about housing preservation, what that covers in the city, Baltimore. Not sure if any of the other panelists have anything they want to add about preservation and playing in your housing strategies.
I was going to jump in. Oh, sorry, Peter, go ahead.
Go ahead, Terry.
I was going to jump in here just because I think it's such an interesting contrast to what Alice said. And I think, so again, I want everyone that's listening to think about how they fit into this. As a suburban, like, we have not invested in a lot of LIHTC based multifamily development. It exists in pockets. And so what do we have? We have a large inventory of multifamily that's old, and it's, naturally occurring for various reasons. In some cases, because the privately held owner hasn't put any money in it and hasn't been at the point where they've been able to jack up rents enough. So we have a double-edged problem. We need preserved units that are going to be restricted for many, many years, that are affordable across the spectrum, but we can't afford to lose what little we already have. And the investment opportunities in Baltimore County we've seen investors swoop in the pandemic, buy a multifamily building and double the rents. You're starting to see it in advertisements for brokers, rent increase opportunities. And we don't have ROFR, although it's something that we're looking very, very closely, as I know others are. But it's a major opportunity for us to encourage not just our affordable development partners, but typical market rate companies to come in with our help, acquire the property. And we're looking at some deals now where we think we can preserve up to 50% of the units in those multifamily communities for 30 or 40 years. So for us, it's an ethical requirement to sort of look at preservation long-term, but I think it's going to be essential to our strategy of working with developers to have those units on hand, to focus on that strategy, at least for the next couple of years, with new construction being so difficult.
Yeah, and for us, we have that problem also, not really the city's issues. And for housing that was tax credit or had other subsidies, that isn't for the most part in danger of disappearing right now, but it really is the class B and C market rate properties that have been bought up as value add deals. That's the terminology to raise rents. Basically, you do modest cosmetic rehab and you jack up the rents, and then you need to sell it again because your investors are out in 5 to 10 years. So there's a cycle where that, the only way this really works is if that keeps going. I will say over the last year, the market has changed dramatically with the rise in interest rates. And now there are properties that aren't being sold, but even with the right of first refusal, which we have, we were not able to compete with the market sector on this. Cap rates were so low, the market dynamics made it just impossible without massive subsidies to be able to keep, promise some affordability, which obviously decreases rent and, your NOI, and make those units something we could compete to match a market rate price. But that has changed, and actually probably the more current problem is with several things on the market, is there some way for us to find the capacity or to get partners to actually take advantage of sales right now that might be more doable? And that comes back to dollars again. If you need a little bit of subsidy or some subsidy to make this work and some form of a pilot, can you put that together enough to take on a class B property that needs some work, but not a complete overhaul, and add some affordability and keep it more or less as it is. And that's a money challenge now.
Thank you all. I'm just going to ask like 2 more questions of the panel, and then we'll move to some questions in the chat from our audience. A continued focus of the HIT has been on how housing can be leveraged as a way to further racial equity and economic justice. And can you speak to how your current policies are addressing this? And Peter, I'm going to ask you to go first because we chatted previously about the importance of this work and how much it means to us working in the affordable housing space.
Yeah, I mean, our existing policies, when we'll preserve anywhere, but if we're doing new construction and production, we're really trying to place that in areas that do not have multifamily housing and certainly don't have dedicated low-income housing today to the extent possible. There's an existing county ordinance that doesn't allow us or the county, we're the housing authority for the county. I probably should have let off of that. But it doesn't allow either of us to invest in areas that are above 10% poverty, which is high for Howard County. Unless, if we're not provided if we were to increase that poverty level. So there's some debate about what that means, but it's clearly a county stated goal to try to deconcentrate. But I don't think that is consistent. We're a little schizophrenic on that. And we, like many places, do limit where multifamily housing can be built, and that in suburban jurisdictions can be fairly severe. And as a result, while we don't want to keep putting new multifamily where we have existing multifamily, the opportunities in other areas are very limited. And that really needs to change. I think zoning is the last state-sanctioned redlining program out there. And it's used that way. And I think neighborhood fabric, neighborhood character at times is used to say, we like these neighborhoods, which were created through zoning and other redlining means that are essentially segregated by income and then hence by race. That's our neighborhood fabric and character. We don't really want to change that. So I think that attitude needs to be confronted and changed. And all of that hits major zoning questions, and you're back to the community issues. And those are difficult public debates. And I was actually taking notes on Helen's issues with community conversation and long-term charrettes and dialogue. And I think we really need that because as it stands now, we end up with county council votes or other things that are very confrontational. And, this housing will hurt this school. One versus another, and way too much of a trade-off. And I think without a broader dialogue on why both schools and housing and these other issues matter for the health of the county overall, it's going to be very hard to make the changes we need to make to address all of these issues.
Thank you, Peter. Anyone else on the panel want to address the topic, Yvette?
I have a comment, yes. We're a small city with limited resources, but our current efforts center in engaging and connecting with our residents, promoting and leveraging existing programs so that everyone is aware of these programs and take advantage of them. Programs can include housing counseling, down payment assistance programs, and home repair programs for the naturally occurring homes that we have in the city. An equity-centered policy enhances access to housing, addresses challenges faced by low to moderate income households, fixed income households, etc. So making them aware of these programs available increases the chances of their creating wealth, generational wealth. So that's what we're doing in our city.
Thank you. Anyone else want to cover that? Alice?
I know for Baltimore, this is one of the key components when we talk about equitable neighborhood development and ensuring that it's community driven and community led. So, we have identified impact investment areas, which are geographic areas around the city where we're trying to do concentrated investment to kind of tackle both vacant properties as well as, site assembly of vacant lots, which would allow for new development and so forth. And we do that in a way of actually doing monthly workshop meetings with the community, where the community is actually providing information on what we call our block level planning, which is really parcel level planning. So we're going down to the parcel of, this group of 5 vacant properties next to this group of 3 vacant lots. What is the plan there? What does the community want to see there? And then that's how we're making those decisions on, okay, those 5 will come down, and then maybe it's those 8 lots now that would be vacant will then be utilized as a priority for site assembly, for affordable housing creation, or for green space, or for the components of creating thriving, vibrant communities. So we're taking this, not just from the standpoint of how do we look at the processes in terms of creating opportunities. So where do we have renters that want to become homeowners? Where do we see opportunity for wealth generation and wealth creation? But also it's really geared towards the community conversations, the community voices, and not just as a check the box, but really as active listening and trying to work through those. Is it always perfect? No. A lot of times I look at it that we're, in a job of mediation, trying to, even in our communities of, we have over 250 neighborhoods in Baltimore, and in those neighborhoods, there sometimes are 5 different community organizations for one neighborhood. And they all have different components of what they want to see. So it really is trying to ensure that we're listening to the voices and trying to come up with the best possible outcome based on what the community wants to see, and how to have them, know that they're being heard in this process.
And then, Jill, I'll just say that, as all my colleagues know, racial equity and economic justice make great conversations, but unless you're going to invest real resources in seeing those outcomes, it really doesn't matter. In the last couple of years, we've created a fair housing full-time position to work on these issues. We hired our first ever deputy director, Ashley Johnson-Hare, who was at Enterprise earlier doing a lot of equity work and brings that into the team. We're doing specific TA for emerging developers, Black women-run development groups. I think the vacant house work we're doing is a very interesting play for small community-based developers to get their hands on properties they wouldn't have normally been able to invest, using our financial tools to see those through. When you look at the HIT tool, some of our biggest inequities are around home ownership. And so one of the areas we're exploring deeply are more pathways for our voucher, our HCV and VASH voucher holders, pathways to home ownership with wraparound supports that are going to work. And then I don't usually name drop, but in this case, a lot of you know Dr. Tiffany Manuel, Dr. T. We've engaged Dr. Manuel she's in the county now, and we're doing community conversations with leaders and others, not about housing per se, but about what vibrant communities of growth look like, of which housing is an essential part. So we're going to be working with her over the next few months to try to get a better joint understanding of how we're going to move forward.
Thank you all. I really appreciate, the specific examples and kind of honest assessment of how challenging and ongoing this work is, and how, we're kind of just beginning to really make some progress and attack it. I am going to move to our Q&A because I want to make sure we address some of the questions from our audience. I don't know if our panelists, if it's some of the questions are addressed to you specifically, and if you're able to answer them, that's great, type it in. If not, I'll try to make sure we ask, but there are a few really important questions that I think each of you can speak to. So one of the questions is about your impression of the GRRP, which is the Green Resilient Retrofit Program that was funded through mostly the Inflation Reduction Act work. How that funding through HUD is seen in your jurisdiction as a possible source of increasing or preserving affordable housing. Are you looking at RRA funding, or is that just something that's still kind of on the boards for you right now?
I would say, we're looking at all the funding options, and we have a number of we actually have the mayor's office of kind of, it's under infrastructure development, and they're taking the lead on evaluating all of the funding opportunities across the federal government that came with the legislation that passed, and kind of seeing how best that could flow to support the work that we have, because we not only have the vertical, but in Baltimore, we have all of the public infrastructure, some of which is a key component to being able to do the new construction vertical. So I know that that's something that at DHCD, we're not necessarily taking lead on, but we're lucky enough to have an agency within the government that's helping to coordinate that across for all the agencies.
I'll go up here a bit to build on what Alice said. I think just this in general, but word to everybody who's listening is the White House knows that housing production is a problem at the local level, and they know they can't influence it directly. And so if you start looking at this and all of the other infrastructure, including the bipartisan infrastructure bill, this conversion of office space to residential, that, a lot of this, they're looking for ways to push money down to the locals that show that they're overcoming these barriers to production. And then those infrastructure help push back against those that are worried about the impact of housing. So we're looking through all of those really carefully and building the capacity to do what we haven't done before, which is to apply for competitive grants to do this work.
Anybody else have any thoughts about that? It's a great point. Okay, I think we're gonna wrap it up. I know some of you are typing your individual answers in the chat, and I really appreciate that. But I guess as a wrap up, I'd love to hear from each of you about any best practices from jurisdictions. You might have heard it from each other today, or from our first panel, or other examples that you've seen in place across the country. Other best practices from jurisdictions that you're looking to integrate into your housing strategy, maybe that you've become aware of more recently.
I can just say that I've been really intrigued. There was an article, not this past weekend, but the weekend before, where Minneapolis has gotten a lot of, press, national press, on how their affordable housing production has impacted inflation, meaning impacted inflation by keeping it at some of the lowest inflation in a larger urban geography compared to other cities across the country. So they're attributing some inflation, I think, below 2% compared to other jurisdictions in the 30% range. And they're attributing it to the significant investment in affordable housing that's been made within the city, and financial commitments that have been made in order to make that work. So that has been a key thing that I've been looking at, and trying to think about how that and what that would do in terms of impacting Baltimore from an economic standpoint, and really pushing affordable housing at the forefront for key significant economic drivers, because I think that's something that is often lost. It's like people sometimes think that the market rate housing creation is what's going to be a key indicator of economic success. And I think this is really something that all of us could look at in terms of showing that affordable housing has a role to play as well.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that, because I think we've been, I saw that spate of articles also, and Minneapolis was one of the earlier jurisdictions to eliminate single family zoning. And that's one of the pieces they attribute to this. And that's obviously an issue for us. It's an issue in Montgomery County, which recently wrestled with this. Arlington County. I know many of the suburban counties are continuing to work with that issue. And it is a really tough issue for people. But I think we need to make progress. So that's something we continue to work on in Howard County, and how, with our current 10-year plan coming up, how are we going to address that? And there was a recommendation to increase the number of units that the county would allow, and to make 25% of those affordable in the actual 10-year plan. So that would be a big step. We're also looking at some other things. In expanding our ROFR, we're looking at Prince George's County model, where right now the county itself here probably isn't going to be buying property. So we have, as a housing authority, have that ability, but we have limited capacity to do that. We can certainly do some, but it would be helpful to be able to expand that capacity. And Prince George's has a great program where they assign that ROFR to a pool of developers they've chosen, and then those developers essentially need to make that, can match a price, but make that housing, add some affordability to that housing. So that was another one. And as I mentioned earlier, I really liked the community engagement ideas that came out of your first panel. So I'll start imitating other jurisdictions now and that. And Terry, what you were saying about your community engagement efforts, I think these are all things I need and we need to learn from and try to do at a broader level. And frankly, I don't know if HAND has an ability to play that role, or the Maryland Affordable Housing Coalition. There might be other regional or statewide groups in the housing biz that, as I think about it now, might really be able to help those discussions at local levels. Because I tend to think these are more local, the political issues are at the local level, not at the regional level. But nonetheless, there might be best practices there that groups can bring to bear for us at the local level.
Thanks, Peter. Terry?
Yeah, so I said I was going to get back to housing finance, and I will end on this. I think a couple of things are pretty evident. We obviously need more housing. Housing is getting more expensive to produce, and locals can't keep up as far as our ability to put money directly into these deals. And also, when we're using ARP money, when that runs out, we just don't have the capacity to continue to do this at the level we'd like. And we've learned, I think, over the last couple of years that what the state is going to be able to do is limited, and we're waiting to see where they're going to go from here. But there's issues with LIHTC and some of these other traditional means of producing housing. So I won't go too deep into it, but Google credit enhancement programs. We're looking really strongly. What are we really good at? We're good at having a good credit rating. We're a AAA county. We have a number of that in Maryland. We're good at borrowing money to get things done. And so King County, also Philly, what about local PHAs in concert with their counties acting in a sense as the bank for some of these deals? It creates some risk, but affordable housing is a great investment. With that being said, we talk a lot about the community dialogues. It's the investors that are skittish and looking for new avenues. And so moving these conversations up into the investment community, I've learned a ton in the last year. There's investors that only want to do residential or only want to do commercial. They've never done mixed use. And then I'll leave you on a really crazy thought. Where does the bulk of the investment money in the country come from? Pension funds. What are those tied to? State and local governments. What are pension funds looking for more and more these days? Impact investment. We should be having conversations at the top levels of pension fund managers about where they want their money invested and see if there isn't a pathway to start to bind that together to drive investment in affordable housing that'll help us at the local level. So, bunch of thoughts.
Awesome. Love it. Not crazy at all. I love it. It's good. Yvette, any final thoughts from you?
I'm just happy to be in this conversation. We're so small, but I think we can still collaborate and definitely continue to talk about financing, gap financing, how to finance projects, maybe thinking outside of the box, how to overcome the challenges of not having land to develop these projects, and also how to remove the stigma of the word affordable. It shouldn't be a stigma. I mean, affordable housing is just housing that's sustainable for everybody, as Peter said. So I think working around that, how can we remove that stigma? Maybe call it something else. Not even workforce, because this is not just for first-time responders, teachers, it's for everybody. But thank you. I'm really happy, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much to our panelists. Thanks for your preparation, your really interesting thoughts, creative thoughts. We are excited to watch your progress and appreciate this opportunity. HAND, thank you for having us all to kind of peer share information and best practices as we're all in this together as a greater region. So I'll turn it to you, Courtney. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you, Melissa, and all of our panelists today for such great conversations. It was wonderful to hear so many different insights and perspectives on how our region is addressing the need, and great to hear that you panelists are learning from each other in the process as well. To respond to a couple of our panelists who mentioned it, we look forward to continuing to play a supportive role in every way that we can here at hand, and specifically convening various stakeholders similar to the way that we've done today. So we're happy to be a resource and play that role. Would also like to thank the HAND team, Susan Ortiz, our program director, as well as Tiana Overton, our program associate, for doing an amazing job on organizing and executing today's session. And last but not least, would also like to thank each of you who logged in today to join. We hope that you benefited from today's conversations and look forward to staying engaged with you over the coming weeks and months. And you can keep up with all things HAND, all of our events and activities that we have coming down the pike at www.handhousing.org. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. So thank you. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we will see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.